Right. Welcome and thank you all for joining us today for the Graduate Student Forum of the ARA SIG93. Before we start, I wanted to do this activities if we have more people, but I'm just skip it up or yeah, I think we can do that. So let's take 20 seconds to introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, affiliation, and year in your program, so we can feel somehow connected and build the network in the future. Thank you. So while you're doing that, the topic of the today's webinar is navigating and preparing for academic job market in the field of physical education. In doing so, today we have four incredible assistant professors, Dr. Nolan, Dr. Beck, and Dr. Fullerton, and Dr. Schultz, who will be walking us through each step of job seeking process. Since they have recently navigated through this process and successfully landed a faculty positions, I'm sure we will learn some genuine insights from them. So when it comes to the structure of this webinar today, we're going to break down this session into four themes. So each panelist shares their experiences or tips regarding job application packet, interview process, teaching and research talk, and then negotiation and post-hire. So at the end of the talk, we're going to have a Q&A session where every audience asks some questions or concerns they have, and the panelists answer those questions. So feel free to engage by dropping your questions in the chat throughout the session. We'll get those questions later in the Q&A time. So without further ado, let's begin with our first panelist, Dr. Nolan, who will be speaking on the job application packet. So Dr. Nolan, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me today. I am looking forward to talking. It wasn't too long since I put this packet together. I am a first year assistant professor over at Cal State San Bernardino. So I just put together this slide to help explain as I talk. So, as mentioned, I'm talking about the application packet, and I'm going to do it using the like the tools that I turned in for my position here at Cal State, which is a teaching-based university. So I'll talk a little bit about my plan is to just go over thinking about understanding different faculty application packets and how to tailor those packets based off of the institution that you're applying to. And then just quickly going through all of the steps that are typically involved in an application packet. So the first step is your cover letter. And when designing your cover letter, it's hard to get started until you know what position you're applying for, because your cover letter is tailored to the job description and the institution specifically that you are applying for. So whether you have to actually look at the description of the job to know whether it's a 10-year track versus a non-10-year track position, because the requirements and the expectations for you are going to differ based off of the types of position that it is. Typically,
Dr. Nolan, I'm sorry to cut you off, but your screen slide does not reflect what you're saying. So probably the screen share thing problem, I guess.
You
Perfect.
you can see it now?
Yeah, I can see it now. I
Well,
think
I
yes.
guess when I went into presentation mode,
Yeah.
it took it out. Okay, I'll just keep it
Yeah.
in this mode then.
Mhm.
Let me zoom in here so y'all can see that better. Okay, sorry about that. So the application packet would, like I said, you're going to start with your cover letter. And you're not going to, or you're going to tailor this to the job description and the institution that you're applying for. So I have just a quick note here to pay attention to whether it's a tenure track versus a non-tenure track position. Typically, if it's a non-tenure track position, it's going to focus more so on the teaching expectations rather than research expectations. Um, but it could vary. It could be a research position that's also a non-tenure track. So it's really important to read the description of the job. Um, and then also to find out whether the university or the specific position is going to be a teaching focused versus research intensive. So it could be a research intensive institution that you're applying for, but the specific job that you're applying for is more teaching based. So making sure that you're understanding those expectations. So when you're tailoring your cover letter, you can highlight what the institution is specifically looking for. Um, I have just a quick note, keep it to 1 to 2 pages max. Um, And I do have a link in here. I can share this slide too, but the links straight to my the cover letter that I submitted myself. I started with I was going to Old Dominion University at the time of my application, so I put my information at the top. I addressed it to the search committee. Um, my first paragraph is really focusing on the position itself and what I am applying for and how I specifically can fit the direct role that or the position that I'm applying for. San Bernardino is a teaching based university. So I started my cover letter with my teaching experiences because that is where or my load is more heavy in the teaching area. So my first paragraph, I take straight from my teaching statement and just kind of reword it a little bit to make more sense for the cover letter. And second paragraph, still focusing on teaching. So you can see I really went heavy on teaching here, being that I was applying to a teaching based position. And then I tried to, moving from teaching into research, trying to show how your teaching expectations and goals as a teacher are reflected within your research as well. And then how your research can support your teaching. So my research focuses within the self-efficacy of PE teachers. And I talk about how the knowledge that I gain from my projects helps inform how I prepare future physical educators. So again, tying that back into those teaching roles as what the university is really looking for. Um, I also mention a little bit about grant funding. It's always important to mention grant funding in your cover letter, no matter the institution you're applying for. If it's a research intensive institution, you probably want to go a little bit heavier on the grant funding side of things. And then not to mention your service. And since there isn't really like a service statement in the application packet, this is where most of your service is mentioned, like in one chunk together, which would be in your cover letter. So this whole paragraph would be talking all about the service that I've done up until the time of application. So, um, The next important piece of your cover letter, or well, of your application packet, is your CV or your curriculum vitae. And I'm sure you're already working on this, or you should be already working on this before the application. But even when you go to submit for a position, you still want to go and tailor your CV to the position you're applying for. As far as the order of operation in your sections, I put teaching experience before my research experience because, again, I was applying for a teaching-based institution. So just a couple important sections, but again, this links straight to my CV if you're interested. My education, any academic related appointments for this position, talk about my teaching experiences, and then I went straight into research and grant funding and whatnot. Not so heavy there because I'm sure you should have talked about CV and up until this point, I think. But I can always go back if there's more questions on it. So the teaching statement would be another item that would be included into an application packet. And it might, if you're applying to a research intensive institution, and like depending on the position, I've seen applications where they don't really want a standalone teaching statement, but that's very rare. So most of the time you're going to have to submit a teaching statement no matter the institution you're applying for. If you're of course a teaching institution, your research statement, you want to be a little thicker, providing more evidence of your teaching effectiveness. So starting with your philosophy of teaching and learning and the sort of methodologies that you utilize for effective teaching. And then not just stating how you teach, but using it or providing examples to support your teaching effectiveness is important as well. And then how your teaching fits into the institution. So that would look at, when you're writing your teaching statement, I would look at the classes that you might be expected to teach based off of the position you're applying for, and sort of talk about any experiences that you might have that relate to those topics, or how your research might relate to those topics and could support your knowledge and understanding in teaching in those areas. So my teaching philosophy starts here, and then I personally, I thought it was the easiest to structure it with like 3 main principles that I liked, that I believe inform my teaching. And then I tailor each paragraph for each of the 3 points above. So the last, or well, no, not the last item, second to last sort of item that you'll have to put together is the research statement. And again, you probably will have to submit one no matter the institution you're applying for, but if it's a teaching-based school and you're only going to be teaching and there's really no research expectations or very little, they might not have a standalone research statement. It might be a combined with a diversity statement or something. But your research statement, you'll focus on your agenda and then your contribution to your field of research. Talk about any past, present, and future research projects that you're involved in. And then if you have any experience with grant funding or plan to have any experience with grant funding, even if it's just taking a course within your studies that help support your knowledge and understanding of grant funding, I would mention that too, because most institutions are going to like to see that you feel confident in achieving or in receiving grants to support your research. And then your impact to your field or the field in general, and then relevance to the institution. So how can your research be supported at the institution itself? I thought I had it linked, but I have it right here. So I start off with my overarching goal as a researcher, and then I primarily have two main areas of research. So I've mentioned those, and then frame the rest of my statement around those two areas of research. I also mention any sort of ways that I work to disseminate these findings into practice, especially where most of us we're physical education our faculty, or we're looking for physical education positions. So it's important to note how your research is embedded within your teaching practices. This is usually about 1, maybe 2 pages. All of them are about 1, maybe 2 pages. And then the last item that you'll have to put together yourself is the diversity statement, which you might not have to, depending on the institution. This one probably varies the most. I had to at my institution, so looking deeply, and sometimes if it's just worth looking at the university or the institution's goals involved with DEI and how that is reflected in your own practices. So in my diversity statement, just talk about the commitment to DEI, strategies within my teaching and mentoring of students that can support DEI, and then how my research contributions can support diversity. And then other than the cover letter, the diversity statement is where I personally found the only location for a lot of my service contributions, for me to mention a lot of my service contributions. Because usually a lot of your service contributions can be DEI related, especially my field is primarily adapted physical education. So all my service contributions involve disability. So this one's only 1 page shorter than the other two, but you might not have to write one depending on the institution. So the last thing that you'll have is recommendation letters, but you won't put those together, of course. Usually you'll have to have 3 recommendation letters, and some applications require the letters prior to submission, and some just require the information of your recommenders, and then they'll contact them separately. So this went on the wrong slide, but just making sure that you have in mind who you're going to reach out to and put down for recommendations. And I can go back to any areas to talk more depthly. I just didn't know the time constraints, so I didn't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, so we're gonna take the questions at the end of the just for the at the end of the Q&A session. So we're gonna move on to Dr. Beck's presentation, and before that, thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Noland. That was very informative and insightful presentation with valuable examples of each document that you have crafted over time. That's very genuine and insightful. Our next panelist, Dr. Beck, will share some tips about interview process. I'll pass the mic on to you, Dr. Beck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Sungyun Baek, and I'm a second-year assistant professor in physical Physical Education Department at SUNY Cortland. I did my PhD at UNCG with Dr. Ben Dyson. Okay, so my part is about job interview. So I would like to talk about two things: on campus, online interview, and then on campus interview. So for online interview, just to start, I prepared like professional attire. I assume like every search committee will be different, but I just don't want to get points deducted just because of my professional attire. So I just prepare, button-down shirts just in case. And when I got invitations to like online interview, like Zoom interview, I was very curious about what questions that I would get during like different interviews. But now looking back, the questions that I got on the, online interviews were not very different across like different institutions. It was more about to get a general idea or like basic information about who I am as a researcher and as an educator, and also what I've done so far and why apply for that institution. So just they talked about like general things. And the next one is, as an international candidate whose first language was not English, at first I created a full script. And during my first interview, I think I kind of tried to read the full script, but like later on, I realized that, okay, at the end of the day, what I wanted to show them is not about how well I can read the script. It is more about how well I can communicate, with different people in English. And I think it can happen to, other candidates, even, whose first language is English, because you can get overwhelmed during the interview process. So I always prepare like after that, I prepared like bullet points, main topics that I would like to talk about instead of creating a full, script. And I think after that, it's just sounded more natural because I was not like reading script anymore. And before like each interview, I always reviewed the job descriptions once again to see what they are looking for the candidate, from the candidate. And instead of just talking about what they value, I try to connect what I've done and what I value to the qualifications that I'm looking for. And it kind of, helped me to give them more specific ideas about how qualified I am for that institution. And also, this is kind of extra thing, but just in case, I went to the university website and the department webpage and checked their review, checked their mission and vision statement, and also like program catalogs, just in case, so that I can incorporate, different elements into my responses. And when I was preparing for my interviews, a lot of my friends told me just to be myself. At that time, I didn't know what they mean by be myself. But now looking back, I think, being myself is very important because I don't want to make up, the stories that I don't really believe. It is but more about connecting who I am and what I've done as a researcher and as an educator to what they're looking for. Next one is on-campus interview. And for on-campus interview, you will receive the interview schedules beforehand. It can be also different based on institutions. Maybe they can give you like 3 days before, or they can give you, 1 week before. It gives you an idea of what the day will look like, the interview day will look like, when you will have like teaching or research presentation, or it will give you any idea of who you are meeting when, and they're not telling like what to talk about, but based on that information, you can plan what to talk about with whom. And my advisor in master's program, she told me on-campus interview starts as soon as I meet faculty at the airport, and it ends at the moment that I say bye at the airport. So my recommendation is be prepared with professional attire and maintain professionalism throughout. Even though, if you're having dinner or, lunch with other faculty member, the environment can be very casual, but I think it is also important to note yourself that, okay, I have to be professional throughout the interview process. And also, based on the interview schedules, I prepare like different questions that I want to ask during my interviews with different faculty members. For example, when I was meeting with department chair, I talked about what teaching looks like in general in that department. But when I was like meeting, dean or like provost or president, I talked more about the research interest that I have, and my research interest lies on rural education, for example. So I talked about how I can extend my research outside of physical education department and contribute to the local community beyond SUNY Cortland. So I talked about those things, more of like general thing, more focused on like community beyond that specific institution. And the last thing is during the on-campus interview, I think this was very hard for me, but at the same time, like I tried to get the notion that they're interviewing me, but I'm also interviewing them because at the end of the day, this is my career. This will be my work, and which will be very important part of my life. So I ask questions that I really want to like know more about to make the best decision for me. And I was very lucky to have an advisor who told me, do not feel rushed because just because you're graduating. So I think just having this mindset that they're interviewing me, but I'm also interviewing them to choose the best institution for me, it really helped me throughout. I think that's all from my end. Thank you again, and thank you for having me. Hopefully, I will get some questions about, on-campus interview and Zoom interview at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beck. As someone who is currently going through this, job seeking process as doctoral candidate, it's really hard, to be, be yourself, and also you are interviewing them, mindset. I mean, it's really hard, for me. But it is definitely, you are interviewing them, and I mean, they also, try to understand you and try to hire you. So you have that kind of mindset. Really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And our next panelist, Dr. Fullerton, will talk about the teaching and research talk. So Dr. Fullerton, please take the stage.
Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Some great points have been made already regarding the interview process. I especially like the Dr. Beck saying you're also interviewing them. That's kind of how I approached it as well, because it is your career. So I'm Dr. Sean Fullerton. I'm a first-year assistant professor at Towson University in the physical education teacher education program. I want to thank Dr. Goodrow at the University of New Mexico. I felt like she prepared me for this process. And so a lot of what I'm going to share with you is how she mentored me. And then obviously it's from my own experience, and I'll try to give some specific examples. So, and first talking about the teaching presentation, you want to know the context. So, who are you teaching? If you're teaching a certain class, you want to know kind of the program of study that the program has. What level are the students? Is it a secondary methods, or is it a lower level class? Practice it. Incentivize participation. So if you're doing a demonstration, or if you're going to do, if you want students to participate, and try to incentivize it some way. Go with what you know. Teach something that you can teach well, that is kind of within your wheelhouse. Obviously, sometimes they may ask for a certain topic, but try to go with what you know. And then I always think of like good teaching is good teaching anywhere. So like follow the fundamentals of good teaching. And so from my experience, I've asked for the course syllabus. I've asked clarifying questions, followed up with if they provide very general guidelines. I will ask, is there a certain topic? What is, make sure you know how long you have. I always try to leave room for questions at the end. I was able to teach it in my motor learning class. So the pictures you see there, I practice it with my students to get feedback from those students. So if you have the opportunity to teach it in an undergraduate class, I would really recommend that and get their feedback. Um, One thing I did a recruiting event here at in Baltimore, and I kind of noticed I went to it 2 weekends in a row. And the first weekend I just brought like pencils and some school supplies because I always appreciate a good pen. So I was like, I'm gonna do some Q&A and anticipate participation with like if you answer, you get to choose, a pen or a pencil. And I noticed the second time that I went, I didn't do that. And the willingness to participate was a little bit lower. So the kids were like more jazzed up when they had something that they got, if they took part in the demonstration, if they answered a question. We've had a teaching demo here at Towson and they brought like little stickers from the university. So something small, cheap, just like a token to get encourage participation helps. I usually go with teaching resistance training skills through a reciprocal teaching style. So I've done this like a million times before. So if I can, I'll try to skew it towards that context and where it would fit into their program of study. But like I know the ins and outs of that teaching episode, so that's kind of what I go with. I get them moving. And then, like I said, good teaching is good teaching. So, like, I've asked, like, one time I was like, my research is in technology, but we're not using technology today. So, can you please put away your computers? And like, everybody put away their computers. I noticed the teaching demo, I had them partner with the person sitting next to them, and that wasn't a good decision because it was usually like their pal or their buddy. So sometimes they didn't take it seriously. So the next time I taught it, I was like, okay, you have to partner up with somebody that's not to your left and not to your right. So it was more heterogeneous grouping. You want a good establishing set. So in PE, we call that the set induction to pique their interests and present the rationale and connect it to prior knowledge. A good demonstration, checks for understanding, feedback, a closure, and some form of assessment, whether it's they write answers on a nameplate or something like that. So I always think like good teaching is good teaching in any context. So those are some examples that have really helped me. I felt like do a good teaching demo. I feel like that was the stronger of my two between the teaching and the research. So now onto the research. Again, my general recommendations: know the context, practice it, demonstrate your research ability and activity. I kind of think of like your fundamentals of research. For me, when I watch a research presentation, I kind of want to see a couple of things like, do they fundamentally like know how to do research? The research process, but then also like, do they think like a researcher? Do they ask questions? Are they curious about things? And do they know the field well enough, at least as a PhD student? Do they know what they don't know, I guess, as well? Identify grants and funding at that school. This was probably the most challenging part. One week you'd be at one, the next week you'd be at the other, and you have to switch to a whole new faculty, whole new program, whole new set of grants. But really identify grants that you can go after, and then like think both short term and then long term as well. Like Dr. Beck said, is this a good fit for you, both in the short term and the long term? So at one school, there was a faculty. I went onto their website and then I like just did some searching, and they had won an award. And so when I met the faculty, I was like, "Oh, congratulations on your award that you just won." And I feel like that kind of like shows that you've done your homework. You also want to know what some of the other faculty, what their research lines are, and you could talk about collaboration ideas, whether it's within Pete or across the kinesiology disciplines. Me practicing my research presentation, most people ask me what was the most challenging part of your PhD. That week going from one to the next and having to do a research presentation was the most challenging part of my PhD because I had never done it before. I have not defended my dissertation. And I didn't, have a lot of experience with it. So that was really tough. So I practiced it within our research lab. So I had Dr. Goodrow there. If you can get one Pete faculty to watch it, I would recommend that. And then just practice it a million times. I practiced it on Zoom, the night before on the plane, kind of have it down. I think of it as like it's not like a stand up and just kind of shoot from the hip. It's like a very rehearsed presentation. Um, So I tried to demonstrate my ability to do research with my dissertation. I also had done an independent study at UNM that was under my own volition, and then I showed the different roles I had played on some of my research on the research projects within the lab that aligned with my research interests. There's a grant called the Facet Scholars Grant, and I had actually identified it in my presentation, and I in my first year I went after that grant and I got it. So. Um, you really want to be like purposeful. Like if it's not a school that aligns with your goals, if it's, like I would really think about that too. Like Dr. Beck said. And then I'm going to show you some resources that have really helped me, but I have a 5-year plan. And I kind of like try to update it every month or so. And it's like kind of that backwards design where it's like what's my goal or plans this year? And then how do I work back from it to like this month? So um, you kind of want to have like the long term in mind, especially if it's a tenure track position with that like 5-year idea. Like it's not going to go exactly how you plan it, but like I always think like you want to at least demonstrate some forethought and a vision to your research. Um, so these resources have really helped me during my time at UNM. Letters to a Young Scientist has kind of helped me like think like a researcher. It's a Harvard researcher that does research on insects. I thought it was a pretty interesting book. The Professor is a good book. They have a lot of topics that we talk about here in this presentation. So that's one I always recommend to new doc students. And then the Independent Scholars book is it's kind of an interesting book. This looks at research like as if you're not at an institution. So I kind of think that like a PhD is it's kind of like what you do is like who you are. It's not like just something that you do on the side. And so this independent scholars book, it allows me to like look at research from the standpoint of like I'm a researcher, like I am driven to do research because I'm interested. And the Independent Scholars Handbooks talks about like how to be a independent scholar outside of institution. And then obviously if you're at an institution, you realize all of the resources that you have available to you. I'll put a link to this presentation in the chat, and then you can send me an email if you want. If you want any of the, like if you want my research or teaching presentations, I'm happy to share that with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fullerton. That was very insightful talk. I also wanted to, highlight, what some of the, what the Dr. Fullerton said. So good teaching is good teaching. This is, very simple in a sentence, but this is something that you have to learn throughout your doctoral program. So you have to hone your, like teaching skills and how to, interact with the students. Those things should be learned throughout your teaching your doctoral program. So thank you so much. Our last panelist, Dr. Schultz, will share his experiences and tips about negotiation and post-hire process.
Perfect. Let's see. Does everyone see this, Youngjun? Perfect, awesome, amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this forum. I want to start off by saying a big thank you to my mentors, Dr. Karen Goodrow, Dr. Karen Richards, Dr. Kelly Simonton, and Dr. Tori Shaver. They essentially prepared me, and I'm here just because of them. So thank you for that. I do want to start off today and kind of tie in what we talked about previously. So the key idea is to understand, first of all, kind of setting the tone. What are we applying for? How do we navigate this process? And this presentation today will specifically focus or use the lens from being on the tenure track and being a first year / second year assistant professor. So once we go essentially through the interview process, we completed our application, we went to the campus interview, we've done a good job. The next thing that will most likely happen, there are a couple of choices, but in our best case scenario, we will get some sort of a acceptance letter or initial offer. So this will happen hopefully to all of us. Based on that, we have a couple of choices that we need to make. And that's where I want to start off and then kind of scaffold the entire presentation around that. Number one is we just accept the offer as it is, right? They present us with the initial offer. We are very happy we got the job. We sign it off. That's it. Number two is we decline it because potentially there is a better offer available somewhere else. So we decline the first offer. Number three now is where things get tricky, is we start to negotiate. And I want to unpack what negotiation is as well. One of the things that helped me within the negotiation process is to buy me some time. So that's what I did in my instance, because I wasn't sure if you have a couple offers available to you and you still need to talk to your mentors and kind of navigate the situation, really unpack the university, understand what's going on. You can ask that. And I bought some, I think 2 more weeks essentially. So once we have that, what we're trying to do with the mindset that we have the initial offer, it kind of starts off potentially as a low bubble. And not to say that the university wants to lowball you, but the idea there is it may be not what you essentially expect. It's not your dream offer. Now, the question then becomes, well, what is your dream offer? And that's what I want to unpack today. Understanding on how we can essentially go from the initial offer and then shape the process towards the dream offer that we want to have. In order to do so, we do have a few general considerations, and I think we talked about this at the very beginning. Number one is being the fit. If we take a look at the fit, it is not unidirectional, it is bidirectional, and that's very important. In other words, understanding the university, but also understanding you and understanding whether the university is a good fit for you and you are a good fit for the university. A lot of things can be talked about as it relates to the cost of living. For example, in California, it's rather steep. So while maybe a little thing, just having this consideration and understanding with some of the things that we'll talk about afterwards as it relates to salary, that could be actually a big consideration. And depending if you're coming by yourself or with a partner, if you have family, if you're alone. Then the last thing that I have here is the umbrella of tenure and promotion. This is something that we as doctoral students probably didn't hear a lot during our doctoral studies, but now something that I hear all the time. And the key idea, everything is mainly scaffolded around tenure and promotion. So towards the very end, I'll talk to you. What are some of the key pillars, essentially non-negotiable strategies that you can start doing from the get-go, and you will be successful moving forward. You will succeed. So I think this will be really helpful. Now, the first thing that we want to start off, and some of the things that we are, it's not in the literature yet, or within the PED literature, basically. So maybe that could be even a consideration to write a Joper paper. But the idea here is that there are 5 items that you can essentially negotiate. So bridge the gap and approximate towards your dream offer. Number one, which is at times maybe the most unrealistic one, not to say it cannot be done, but it's salary. It is one of the most important aspects, but depending on the university and the socio-political climate, maybe we only have so much leverage there. So they could have a firm offer, it stands, and the most important thing to understand here is it's a one-time thing, basically. All the other 4 that I will share, they're shapeable. In other words, they will go away potentially over time. Base salary remains same until you potentially in 5 or 6 years reach tenure and promotion. Then one more time upgrade to a full professor. So this is one of the considerations where maybe there's only so much that you can negotiate. The idea here is potentially stay within 3 to 5% deviation in terms of that, and then of course leverage why. So tell them why you're such an exceptional candidate. Is it because of the experience? What do you bring? What can you provide as the scholar? And within that context, of course, know the ramifications. So when I talked previously of doing your homework, what is the salary within potentially that state and within that profession? Have a general understanding. What are the numbers? Okay. Let's say It doesn't work out. Your dream salary, it just doesn't work out. Well, what are some of the other things that you can leverage, that you can negotiate, that are a little bit more palatable and accessible? Let's take a look. So the first one is being summer salary. It is essentially something that can be done where you potentially have courses or classes over the summer. It could be a 1 year, a 2 year assignment, a 3 year assignment, but that is something that can be done, that you can negotiate depending on the work that you do, and something that you can also ask if that's even a consideration, if that's a possibility within your university. So that's number 2. Number 3 that we have is relocation. In other words, moving cost. If you're right now, let's say somewhere in the east, you're moving to the west, and vice versa, it can be quite expensive in terms of furniture and moving things around. So moving expenses is number 1. You can negotiate that. Number 2, and just even having the idea that we can do this, yes, we can negotiate moving expenses. Number 2, some universities offer faculty housing. So depending on where you are, inquire about that, and that could be really feasible, because depending on the prices of the different houses, it could be something really, really helpful. You'll be able essentially to purchase a house through the university. And then the last one, if you do have a partner, think about your partner and consider them within the process of where you are. Potentially, there are some pathways for a spousal hire, essentially. Number 4 that we have, and this is one of the what we call startup, or the startup package. So having the idea and the startup are all the elements that essentially, think about it from the lens that will make you or allow you to succeed as a teacher, scholar, research teacher, okay? A few things that we need to navigate over there. Number 1 is equipment. Think about what equipment will you use as a professional in terms of software. Is it NVivo? Is it Deduce? Is it transcription? Is it Qualtrics? Is it some sophisticated software that you will later on to analyze the data? Think about that, put it in. Number 2, hardware. Is it a computer? Is it a keyboard? Is it a mouse? Is it a little microphone? Microphone can be expensive. So think about those elements as well, specific to your little niche discipline and what you want to do with your research. Number 2 that you can navigate is lab space. Some of us think we should all have our lab space, but depending on the university, this can be actually a greater good, because space can be very, very limited. If you're thinking to do research with your students, where will you do it, basically? So ask for lab space or inquire about that. How will that look like? And also the duration of it. It's not just for a month, maybe for the first 5 years, where you can meet with your students and talk about, for example, socialization theory. Travel funding. So think about conferences. Make sure you, again, have those justifications ready, that you'll maybe travel to SHAPE, represent the university, you have a few projects lined up, travel to ARA, everything relating to essentially demonstrating and representing the university that you will be on later on. The next one that we have are graduate student assistants. And I divide this in 2. You can have a graduate student assistant as it relates to a teaching assistant. So a person that will help you out within your classes that you'll be teaching. You can ask for that if that is being offered, but then also a research assistant. So a person that will help you with the research that you'll be essentially doing on an ongoing basis. And then again, ask for maybe for how long, if that is a possibility, and maybe you can even ask for 1 or 2. So essentially that research assistant will be funded with the money, okay? Then the next thing that we have, and this will be the last one as it relates to startup funds, is course releases. And course releases, when we think about that, not only the duration, so maybe we are at the university where you have a 3 or 2 load, but then one course essentially will put to the side. Then the question is, if it is being put to the side for you to get started and really have everything available, think about for how long. Is it for a semester, for a year, for 3 years, for 5 years? And then you go back to the general course load. And then when we talk about course releases, well, how many? Is it 1, 2, or 3? So there are a lot of things to navigate, and something where, in my experience, the university and the dean there, they have more flexibility there, and it'll allow you to jump in those conversations and have those beautiful discussions. Now, one of the last things that I want to talk about is service credit. That is something that I didn't know because I wasn't at the university before, but essentially the idea here is if you bring on service credit, meaning you've been at the university before as an assistant professor, let's say for 2 years, what you can do is you can take that time and count it towards your tenure and promotion later on. So instead of going, for example, all 5 years, you would only go 3. We had a few faculty members during our new faculty institutes that who essentially arrived with 2 service years, which counts now towards their tenure and promotion. Now, these are essentially the items that are, I hope, will be helpful in terms of really doing those conversations and closing the gap, something that you can inquire and something that you can think about just as big bullet points, and maybe go over with your mentor and really structure, and that will also help you to unpack your initial offer letter. And even identify, are those items listed within the offer letter? If they're not, maybe that would be a great point to dive deep in and start inquiring what are some of the possibilities that we have over there. Now, the other thing that I do want to talk about today is post-hire considerations. And I want to approach this from a lens that will really helpful or will be helpful, and I hope even set you up really for maximal success even before you start joining the university. So one of the things that we talk about a lot within the RTP process, which is really essentially the tenure retention process, are those 3 big pillars. It's teaching, it's research, and it's service. Now, the key idea, and I think Dr. Nolan mentioned this at the very beginning, and Dr. Fulton, Dr. Beck, that they're kind of ever floating within the realm of higher education. Now, the key here, or the major consideration to understand that those are actually not equally distributed depending on the university. So you need to understand and potentially work backwards, and the committee will also tell you what is the appropriate teaching load. For example, it could be something like this, where we have a good amount of teaching, so the focus is on teaching, and then we have a little bit of research, and then a little bit of service. It could be vice versa, right? We could have a bigger amount of research than we would have service and teaching. The key idea is to understand that and to identify that and work towards that. So then you will set the priority. This will allow you to maximize your tenure and promotion. Instead of, if the university is heavy on teaching, then you have to be an exceptional teacher. There's no doubt about it. You got to know the pedagogy and be very skillful and adapt with that. If the focus is on research, well, then we got to probably ramp up our publications. So that's the big understanding, and it is usually described, all of this information, those standards are described just like we have K-12 standards. They're described within your VPAF or within a document that you'll get that will really break down what do we need to do in order to achieve that. Now, when we talk about research specifically, the first thing that we want to do within those 3 pillars is to establish your research line. So do not wait. Don't think about it too long. Best possible scenario, you have your research line ready to go during your PhD. So the things that you set up, you'll set yourself up for success, and then you continue to stretch it over time and building little blocks on top of each other. It needs to be conceptually sound, basically. So we try to stay within one line, become the expert within that one line, and so we don't jump around, because when you start writing up your reviews, annual reviews, what the reviewers essentially are looking for is that sound, and is it aligned over time? So the goal is to start thinking now, what is your research line and how will you conceptualize it over time? What Dr. Fulton said, we need to make sure that that and all of that within the bigger scheme, what we're trying to do is to align everything together. So teaching, research, and service. So everything fits kind of in one bubble. So it's not all disorganized, but it's nicely aligned within those 3 pillars. Now, one of the important things as it relates to our research line and to understanding our research line, it can be twofold. Basically, one could be it's internal, and by internal, I mean working with internal colleagues, with the people that you will be at the university. Maybe it'll be your next door neighbor, maybe it'll be an interdisciplinary scholar, maybe it'll be someone from the grant department. And so basically, it's university affiliated. The other way to think about research are our external colleagues. So the relationships that you build right now with your faculty members, with the peers within your department, keep them. Because you'll find potentially yourself in a situation where there is only a handful really within the department that can speak on behalf of the research that you're doing. So you'll have to go back and work with the members that you established before joining the university. That's number one. So establishing research line and having those kind of 2 key pillars going from there. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is teaching. And teaching it's depending again on the university. One of the bigger things that we look at is the idea of are we feeding and are we understanding our the mission of our university and the vision statement, and also the mission and vision statement of our college, of our department, and basically making sure that we're working with our students. So the students that you're working with at your university, this is where the focus is. And then once we understand that and we contextualize, we understand our students, where they're coming from, what does the major look like, how is the program structured, generally speaking, because at times maybe it is a full-blown physical education, teacher education program. It could be more so general in nature. So understanding that, because students will come in with different types of prior knowledge, and we need to make adjustments accordingly. And here, what I want to stress is focus on learning. So not teaching, we got to be a good teacher, but focus on learning, because the key idea behind teaching is to understand whether my students learn. Like the output is student learning, basically. And that's one of the things that I try to center my paradigm around. It's student-centered. It's student-centered. But that being said, there will be a lot of things coming your way as it relates to teaching, creating syllabus, maybe potentially building a new class. What we want to do is we want to be highly over, and just like we want to be over prepared during our teaching lessons or teaching demonstrations, we want to be highly organized, extremely organized on our desktop, on our computer, and potentially start building that portfolios. Right from day one, make sure you have different folders for your different classes, the materials, you plan everything out, you'll keep that information. It'll make things easier later on. And students also love a highly organized instructor. Then think about your students. So value their feedback and appreciate it. In a way, what I like to do is to have a mid-semester evaluations, a informal one through a survey I created through Qualtrics, and then towards the very end, there's possibly a post-evaluation by students done. When students provide that type of feedback, make sure you read this and you implement those strategies within your future teaching. And one of the last tips that I want to pass along is work with your colleagues. I still have very, very good friends and colleagues from my previous university that I work right now. If I'm not quite sure how I should tackle this particular challenge or a class, I'll just give them a call. And again, the idea of relationships start to come in and building those relationships. Now, the last thing that I want to touch base is service. And the idea behind service is when we join, we want to start off and work within our department and contribute meaningful experiences to our department. So acquire a position and focus maybe potentially the very first year first, second year within a big focus on the department, because there will be potentially a lot of offers coming your way to serve on the university level, to serve on the community level. What we want to do is we want to build from within and then go outside. So over the years, then you start kind of going up the ladder and becoming a leader within the college, a leader within the university, potentially joining the Senate, and then within the community. So it'll shift as you grow, but the idea here is we want to focus on the leadership roles that we can join and attain within our floor where we are. And I hope I'm on time, Youngjun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schultz, for your presentation. That is very, visually pleasing and informative. I recently went through the negotiation process as a, candidate, and I wish I could have watched this, your talk, beforehand. I could accept, more, negotiable, construct. Thank you so much. So now let's transition into a Q&A session. So if you have any questions or concerns that you have about job seeking process, please feel free to just mute yourself and ask questions, or leave the questions in the chat box. And yeah, so any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Thank you for all of your presentations, very helpful. Directly related to Dr. Schultz's negotiation process, how do you know that you are in a good place to negotiate? Personally, I would be afraid of touching that, because I would be concerned that if I bringing up the point of negotiation, that I already have a negative outpoint in my head to say, oh, if they can't catch me negotiating, then I'm gonna lose the whole job letter opportunity by itself right away. So I want to know, how are there specific signs that tell you, okay, you're in a good place to negotiate? Yeah, so thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I would start off with the idea of attempt to negotiate. So the idea is it's always almost the baseline idea is here is to negotiate, because it also potentially signals the committee the strong interest and the idea of that we have this perceived competence and confidence within our skills. I think that's a great virtue to have. And then it was very nerve-wracking for me the very first time around. And what really helped me is actually having those conversations with my mentor. So because probably otherwise I wouldn't have done it, if I'm being honest. I wouldn't have done it because there's so many things on the line. It's probably the very first time that we are in this position. And what helped me is I bought a little bit of time. I talked this through, and I've started to unpack the things that I just talked about, basically, and really start to think within the bigger idea, the things that are available to me, will I be able to succeed with that? And the answer should be yes in best case scenario. And if not, I did approach it from a perspective, I truly need this. Like if I'm being very honest, in order to succeed at the university and to really become a great scholar, a great teacher, I would just need those basic fundamental needs, basically. And that's what helped me to ask and to have those conversations, which actually there were two negotiation cycles. So what I'm trying to say, it potentially doesn't stop with one, because they will come back to you and then you'll come back again. So that is one of the things that also can happen.
Maybe I just want to ask further question about negotiation. So how do you actually, thank you for all the presentation. It was so impressive and it's so helpful. So in terms of negotiations, how do you know how much like room that I can negotiate? So we don't really know. Like I always, as a candidate, we want more, as many as possible. So how much do we know? Like they have, like the college or department has the room that we can negotiate for our like salary package or the base salary or something else.
Yep, that's a very good question. And depending on the university, as it relates, like as I mentioned, the first point of the salary, I think it'll be very straightforward. It'll be either a potential yes or a no, and they will be very firm on that depending on the university, because at times they're also tied. They have their regulatory pace essentially, and this is where we are. All those other elements, that's where we can leverage. That's where we can leverage your expertise and you can make really great justifications, basically. And take those bullet points that I mentioned and then just walk over through them. Walk over through them and ask and essentially start those process in terms of course, in accordance with your mentor, but the idea there is that if we have those big bullet points now, these are some of the things that we can directly approach and approximate and create, go from our initial offer and widen it up to our dream offer. That's the idea. So, and that really helped me during the negotiation process because at times we potentially don't even know what we can negotiate, basically. And I think those pillars are rather, they can be applied universally. Yeah.
And like piggyback on that, I think if you get a final offer, it means that you are a really good candidate. And it takes a lot of process to give someone an offer letter. So I think from that standpoint, you can be a little bit more confident, in negotiation process. But when you're actually, giving them specific, points about negotiation, for example, like for salary, a lot of, state university, they open like salary for professors in different department. And if you go into like higher education, some university have their like baseline like salary on their job description. And if you go to like other, subjects setting like elementary education or, other education departments, they also open their salary. So like based on that, I would kind of adjust my negotiation for salary and also like based on my, prior experience. For example, if I'm a, PhD student who just graduating from my program, I would not recommend going too far. Like because, I'm a fresh grad. So I think like taking into a lot of different things into consideration would be definitely helpful.
All right, I'm gonna have a second question here for Dr. Beck. Is it pronounced correctly, Dr. Beck?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned you instead of using a script, you used your bullet points for the online presentation or online interview. Now, when you went on campus to those universities, like the trip there, um, did you have was that all free speech based, or did you still have bullet point with you that you utilized in between to make your conversation, give it a structure? I struggle with the language as well. That's why I'm trying to get all good hints on how to perfectionize those things.
So I prepared the main topics that I would like to talk about with different faculty members. So there was kind of a script, but it's just about like general introduction when I meet different people. But I didn't really use like full script on campus interview because it would not be like natural if I like prepare a full script and use that full script when I'm like talking with other people in person. But I always, had in mind what I want to talk about when I meet, my department chair or other faculty members, like casually or formally during interview settings. But I just saved like some of important questions for my like former interviews, because if I use all those good questions in during my informal conversation with other people, like I will run out of important question that I should ask at the end of the interview. So if it is more of informal setting, I would definitely talk about, just like sometimes like personal things or my personal experience during my PhD program, something like that. But if it is something really critical about the job position or some critical question that you want to talk more about the department itself, I will save those questions for the end of the interview.
Okay, thank you so much. Any last questions that take us home?
Yeah, I had a quick question. I'm currently in my second year, so I wanted to hear just a bit about more of the job application process. How many schools you applied for, how early you did it, and how long, or maybe how long it took to hear back from these kind of schools.
Yeah, so I started applying as soon as applications became available towards the end of my second year going into my dissertation. I applied around August to a bunch of schools, August, September. I heard back really quickly from where I got my position. And so while I submitted several applications, probably 15 to 20 different applications, I only went on one interview because it came a lot quicker than the other ones.
Right. Before we so thank you so much for all the questions and answering to those questions. Before we officially wrap up, I would like to take a moment to thank four panelists today sharing their experiences and tips for us. This talk has really helped us to gain some understandings of what the process looks like and prepare for the job market instead of just learning by experiencing. So I also thank all the audience who attended today. I hope we could keep in touch via email or through the ARA conference or on any other international level conference. If you haven't been the member for our SIG yet, please join our SIG and just enroll to have the membership. Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.